God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus. Amen. This morning we heard the well-known story about the Transfiguration. This story is so important for the life of the church that we get it twice. So a little church nerd moment. When's the other time of year we get this story? Anyone know? August, that's right, for the Feast of the Transfiguration. We also get this story on the last Sunday of the season after the Epiphany, right before Lent begins. And I call this Sunday the Irish Transfiguration Sunday. Let me say more about what I mean by that. In August, we're in full glory. It's sunny, the earth is bearing its fruits, we slow down, we enjoy life, we think about God's glory, right? We're experiencing it in our lives. This Sunday, we get it in February, when it's rainy and cold, when we're about to turn into Lent and think about our mortality. We get the light shows of Jesus' clothes and being transfigured, lit up, transformed, going through a metamorphosis. That's why it's a bit of an Irish transfiguration. This story is so important for the life of the church. We get it twice, in this in-between Sunday, between Epiphany Tide and Lent. And what is the story of the Transfiguration? Jesus goes on a teaching and preaching tour, right? He has about to set his face towards Jerusalem, and he takes with him Peter, James, and John, and they go up to the mountaintop, and there, all of a sudden, Jesus is transfigured. In Mark's gospel, Mark is really concerned about how light and white Jesus' clothing are, right? He says in Mark's gospel, it's as though they were bleached. Altar Guild, did you hear that? This is your dream. Transfigured linens. Matthew's gospel talks about how Jesus' face shone, right? Like Moses' face shone when he went up to Mount Horeb and received the 10 Commandments because he encountered the great I Am, and it just made his face shine. We get this story in all the synoptic gospels, and each gospel writer gives their own little slant. But what's present in all three is Jesus' transfiguration, the presence of James, John, and Peter, and then the appearance of Moses and Elijah. And of course, God's voice that comes seemingly out of nowhere from the cloud, confirming Jesus' identity. This moment is layered with rich biblical meaning. We're supposed to think about different biblical stories in the story of the Transfiguration, so let's unpack that for a moment. We hear about Moses and Elijah. Moses is there because he is the prophet that led Israel through the wilderness to their liberation, right? Jesus is the long-awaited prophet. He stands in the prophetic line of Moses. Very important. And Elijah is there too, who is believed to be the last prophet, right? We're waiting for the coming of the Messiah. That's why some people have an Elijah seat, right? We're waiting for the Elijah to come back, right? And Jesus is being portrayed as the long-awaited prophet that they've been waiting for, the Messiah. We have the presence of Elijah and Moses. Then Peter, James, and John are there too. They're his disciples, his groupies, who are going town to town on his preaching and healing tour. And Peter loves this moment. He loves it so much he wants to bottle it up, right? He wants to just keep it forever and make tabernacles. Have you ever had an experience of God's glory in your life you just wanted to bottle up, freeze, and keep forever? That's how Peter is feeling in this moment. And then out of nowhere, it seems, we hear God the Father's voice from heaven, confirming Jesus' identity. This is the moment that then they leave the mountain. Just as quickly as it happened, it seems like the cloud vanishes. Jesus returns to his normal state in terms of what his appearance is. And then Jesus sets his face toward Jerusalem. They exit the mountain, and they go into the valley. And what is the next mountaintop that Jesus will be displayed on? but Mount Calvary, when Jesus is hung on a cross and crucified for you and me. And many New Testament scholars have made the kind of comparison that we have in the Transfiguration, Jesus on a mountaintop, his body transfigured. We have that on one mountaintop. And on the other mountaintop, we have Jesus' body crucified, right? And there's this long journey in the valley, this in-between journey between these two mountaintops that we get. Some New Testament scholars have argued that to see Jesus transfigured is to see him crucified. And to see him crucified is to see him transfigured. That's why this is the Irish Transfiguration again. And this makes sense, I think, for a lot of us, because most of our lives are not spent between two extreme mountaintops. Most of our lives are spent in that middle zone, in the valley, as it were, between these two mountaintops. And what the Transfiguration makes possible is that in those moments we bear witness to the crucified Christ, we also can bear witness to the transfigured Christ right then and there. In those moments when we view the transfigured Christ among us, we can have a glimpse into what the crucified Christ looked like. Let me point to your leaflet to get at what I'm meaning by this a little more. If you open up your leaflet to the inside cover, you'll notice a poorly printed image of a pot and then a poem. The pot, you probably have seen better images. Maybe you have a piece of the kintsugi, Japanese pottery. It's the art of breaking a piece of pottery or repairing it if it was repaired, needing repair. And the artist will collect the broken pieces and then glue it back together with gold lacquer, right? And if you can just imagine, this is a broken urn and it's held together with gold. This is that image of transfiguration and crucifixion that I'm trying to get at. It's the image of all of us have brokenness in our lives, that through God's glory, God comes and glues them back together. I wonder, when have you seen the transfigured Christ in your life? Growing up in the church, I was often encouraged to look out for the crucified Christ or the resurrected Christ. But when have you seen the transfigured Christ in your life? I think about a few stories of my own experience of witnessing a transfigured Christ amid brokenness, much like this piece of pottery that I'm holding up. I was visiting a 90-year-old woman, and she had just had a bad fall. And she invited me over. She was living with her son and his wife, and we started the visit with some tea. It was their tradition, so we had some green tea, and we talked, and she was telling me just about how much pain she was in, because she had broken her hip, and at 90 it was a longer recovery. And as I was preparing the Eucharist, we received the Eucharist, and as I was preparing to leave, all of a sudden I noticed this glorious grand piano, and I was like, who plays? And Letty is her name, stood straight up like this, sat straight up, and got her walker and went over, and then slowly she sat down at the piano and began playing a rousing number. And before me, I witnessed the crucified and transfigured Christ. It's like her entire being was transformed by playing the piano. And when she was done, she looked at me and she said, "Come again?" It was like I was interacting with two different people. I'll tell you one more story to get at what I'm saying. As you may know, my dad had a massive stroke about 10 years ago, and in his time of full glory, he had the stature of a defensive lineman, big man. My husband said he was scared the first time he met him. Not a bad thing. Just saying, now I have a daughter and a son. And, he traveled a lot growing up. Tuesday through Thursday, he was on the road, but he was always sure to call me on the road and sing to me Stevie Wonder's I Just Called to Say I Love You. This was a weekly thing. It was a big part of like the I Miss You Dad, come back calling. So even in college he did this. Even in grad school he did this. Well, he had the stroke. I didn't hear from him for 5 years. And then one Valentine's Day, he called me up and sang me that song, right, with aphasia, so that you can still kind of sing. And in that moment, I witnessed the transfigured Christ. I think for most of us, this resonates, right? It's in this valley time, this journey time, that we bear witness to the crucified and transfigured Christ. We see God's glory in this brokenness. We see God's desire to transform us, to transform the people whom we love, the entire created order, into this divinized reality, this reality that's drenched in God's grace. And that's what the transfigured Christ means for us. It means that Jesus' divinity has transformed our humanity. Think of the endless possibilities that are being made by that moment of the transfigured Christ. In this meantime, as we are traveling between these two Sundays, these two mountaintops, I leave with you Malcolm Guite's poem. It's in your leaflet. He wrote it on the Feast of the Transfiguration, which, as we know now, it happens in August, but it speaks to us now. And I'll end this reflection with the end of the poem, and I commend the whole poem to you in your own time. He wrote, "A sudden blaze of long extinguished hope trembled and tingled through the tender skin, nor can this blackened sky, this darkened scar, eclipse that glimpse of how things really are." Amen.
Amen.